What if the Soviet Union joined the Axis? In our own timeline, the Soviet Union and Germany signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and divide Eastern Europe between themselves, despite of their conflicting ideologies. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact wasn't a military pact unlike the Axis per se. The Soviets did try to join the Axis, but were left on reed, and less than a year later Germany would invade the Soviet Union, pushing them into the arms of the Allies. But what if that didn't happen? What if the Soviet Union joined the Axis? In this timeline, despite of the conquest of the Soviet Union being their ideological goal, Germany accepts the Soviet demands, and on the 25th November 1940, just 2 days after Romania joined the Axis, the Soviets joined the Axis as well. This would be a huge shock for the world. The Soviets would invade China to assist the Japanese, and China quickly crumbles. China is divided into a Western Japanese zone and an Eastern Soviet zone. The Japanese zone would be the Republic of China under Wang Jinhui, while in the West the Soviets established the Chinese Soviet Republic, centered around Chengdu under Mao Zedong, with both being puppet states. The Soviets also established the East Turkestan Republic under Ulayan Tor, and Mongolia annexes Jeju, Suiwin and Ningxia. The fall of China would be extremely concerning for the British and Americans, as the Axis established dominance in East Asia. Yugoslavia and Greece would fall just like in our own timeline, and facing pressure from both sides, Turkey and Iran are forced to join the Axis. The Axis would then help of Iraq to push out the British, and from both the Middle East and Egypt successfully push towards the Suez. Within Palestine, especially Jews being horrifically murdered by the Germans. In order to press for British Raj, the British launched an invasion into Iran that stalls. A last glimmer on hope came for the British with Pearl Harbor, and the American entry into the war. But here Japan not only conquers Southeast Asia, but with the majority of its army not being in China, they fight the British in Raj, while at the same time they are being pushed out of Iran. The British lines collapse and northern India falls to the Axis, but they manage to regroup in the south. After that the war freezes down, and a peace deal is signed in Geneva in 1944. In continental Europe, the Axis keep all of their gains, with the British having to stop supporting governments in exile. For France, Spain annexes Ruslan and Italy gets Nice, Savoy and Corsica, while the Reichskommissariat of Belgium and northern France gets the closed zone, with the rest becoming the French state. In Africa, Spain gets Morocco, Italy gets Tunisia, Egypt, Sudan and Somaliland, and France gets back its colonies in Equatorial Africa. In the Middle East, Turkey is given Syria, while Iraq takes Kuwait and Jordan. In Palestine, the Mufti comes to power. India is split into the Soviet-aligned Indian People's Republic in the northwest around Delhi under Puran Chand Joshi, Japanese-aligned Azad Hind in the northeast around Calcutta, and British-aligned Dominion of India based around Bombay under Jawaharlal Nehru. Japan keeps its Southeast Asian holdings and establishes the Republic of Indonesia under Sukarno. The Axis are without a doubt the victors of the war, with the only two surviving Allied members being the United Kingdom and United States. The Axis alliance would not last long, however, as soon the Japanese formed their own alliance with their Asian vassals, while the Soviets also left. In the president election of 1944, Franklin D. Roosevelt got demolished by Republican Thomas E. Dewey, as he is blamed for the humiliating defeat in the Second World War, and Dewey becomes 33rd President of the United States, and John W. Bricker as 35th Vice President. FDR would die shortly thereafter, and while it is by now too late, in Dewey's first year in office, the very first nuclear bomb would be tested. Dewey likely wins a second term in 1948 against Harry S. Truman. In Europe, tension are rising quickly, and in 1949, Germany and its allies would invade the Soviet Union. The war would be brutal and a tougher fight for Germany, as the Soviets are more prepared, and had 8 years to industrialize and recover from the Great Purge. But here, they stand all alone, with the Allies not helping them. The Soviets also have to face Iran and Turkey in the south, and also Indian ANS, especially Afghan rebels. The war would eventually freeze down from Leningrad to Rostov, while the Turks and Iranians only made moderate gains in the Caucasus and Central Asia. They were also forced to withdraw out of Afghanistan and India. Meanwhile, in 1950, near Midway, gunfire was exchanged between American and Japanese ships, prompting the United States to declare war on Japan. First action would be seen in Kiribati, where American ships in American Samoa and Jarvis Island attacked the Japanese garrison there, who were caught off guard. Soon later, Samoa, Tonga, Tuvalu, Fiji, New Caledonia and Vanuatu are also liberated, with heavy fighting in the Solomon Islands. Commonwealth forces would also engage the Japanese in India and support the Malayan Communist and Viet Minh to distract the Japanese. The Allies would also land near Rangoon to the shock of Japan. They advanced east and forced Thailand to switch sides. Japan would be forced to withdraw out of Laos and Cambodia, with many being encircled and captured. The Japanese only hold western Burma, East India and Singapore, but these two wouldn't last long either, with especially Singapore being a great symbolic victory for the British. From Southeast Asia, the remnant of the Chinese army under Li Zongren and the Republic of China would be recreated in Nanning. Sukarno, seeing the writing on the wall, formally declared the independence of Indonesia and signed a peace agreement with the Western Allies, only for Japan to invade Indonesia to hold on to it, causing Sukarno to join the Allies and eventually drive the Japanese out. At this point, the Japanese Empire falls apart, with the Americans liberating the Philippines and many Pacific islands, while the NRA insurgents and Allied forces rapidly approach Nanking, and with Japan being aware of American nukes and their huge stockpile, Japan sues for peace, ending the war. All the gains Japan made since 1914 would be reversed. Azad Hind would be incorporated into the Dominion of India, and a Commonwealth military administration overseas is established in Burma to eventually grant it independence. Thailand would keep its gains from the previous war, and communist regimes exist in Malaya and in the Indochinese Federation. Britain would be able to hold on to Singapore, and Indonesia gains independence with both East Papua and North Borneo. The United States and Australia partition the islands liberated from Japan, and the Philippines gain independence under a pro-American government. The Japanese vassal in China and Manchuria would be dissolved in favor of the Li Zongren regime. Japan would be diminished and only holds on to Taiwan, Korea, and it gains from Germany in World War I, but would be brutal to the natives there nonetheless. In 1952, during the war, Republican Bricker would become president against Adlai Stevenson, but Stevenson would defeat him in 1955. China would reinvade West China, Mongolia, and East Turkestan, and India would invade Western India, as the Soviets are currently busy. Speaking of them, their war with Germany hadn't really moved, even after Stalin and Hitler's death, and the Allies would now pressure the Germans and Soviets to sign a peace treaty. Germany would keep Ostland and Ukraine, but returns any other gain, with Romania getting Bessarabia and Transnistria, and Finland getting its pre-Winter War borders. After the war, both Germany and the Soviet Union would be weakened, with relatively minor territorial changes, and a second round seems likely. Germany's sphere in Europe might actually shrink, as many of its allies, like Italy, leave the Axis and might even cooperate with the Allies. Meanwhile, in the 50s, the German economy would go into depression, pulling its vassals down with it. This in turn leads to instability, and the triumvirate that existed between Göring, Himmler and Goebbels finally broke down, and a power struggle emerges between the three of them. During this, Germany was forced to withdraw its forces out of its holdings. Yugoslav partisans would manage to topple the government of National Salvation and form the Socialist Republic of Serbia. Serbia was able to strike a deal with Italy in which they'd get Croatia and Montenegro, but give up their claims in Kosovo, Macedonia, Bačka, and Slovenia. Slovakia would decide to side with Italy for protection, and the German occupation zone in Greece was taken by the Italian Hellenic state. Denmark declared its independence, and the French state was overthrown by French partisans, who invited exiled Charles de Gaulle to lead their state. Allied forces would also liberate Norway, Belgium, and the Netherlands. In the east, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Lithuanians, Latvians and Estonians would rise up, only to end up under Soviet domination once more. German settlers would be forced back to Germany, where Göring centralized power under himself, thanks to the military. But Germany is no longer the power it once was, as its influence in Europe is gone, its economy is in the gutter, fighting in Germany ravaged the nation, and the army is weakened. The only thing keeping the Allies from invading Germany would be mutually assured destruction. With that, both Germany and Japan would be pushed back to their core territories, but ethnic minorities still in these, like Koreans or Poles, would be under the mercy of their occupiers. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union would still collapse in 1991, with the Baltic republics, Belarus, and Ukraine finally getting independence, and quickly seeking security guarantors against the hermit kingdom that is Germany. In this timeline, the Axis would manage to mostly win the Second World War, but infighting between them would see the German-Soviet alliance fall and the Japanese Empire, Greater Germanic Reich, and Soviet Union all disintegrate, with Italy being the only major Axis power left standing. If you liked the episode, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Goodbye.